former adversaries Barack Obama and John McCain met face-to-face today for the first time since the election. On the agenda, the many enormous problems facing our country and how they can tackle them together. Meeting with former rivals seems to be a new hobby of the president-elect. He also met with former Democratic presidential candidates Bill Richardson and Hillary Clinton last week in Chicago. Tonight, there's a growing buzz over whether Hillary Clinton will be our next Secretary of State. On 60 Minutes last night, President-elect Obama was asked about the possibility of rivals on his cabinet.
I've been spending a lot of time reading Lincoln. There's a wisdom there and a humility about his approach to government, even before he was president, that I just find very helpful.
Put a lot of his political enemies in his cabinet.
He did.
Is that something you're considering?
Well, I tell you what, I find him a very wise man.
Will there be Republicans in the cabinet?
Yes.
You heard it there. Here's my issue tonight. Obama is practicing peace. He is reaching out to former enemies and saying, I will embrace you and find common ground with you. How can we possibly ask Iraqis who have seen their loved ones die to practice peace with their enemies if we cannot practice peace with our own political enemies after an election? Barack Obama is putting into action his philosophy of finding common ground and operating from humility rather than ego. And that really is a peacemaking philosophy. Joining me now is Representative Dennis Kucinich, a Democrat from Ohio, a former presidential candidate and an advocate for a Department of Peace. Also, John Ridley, commentator for NPR and founder of ThatMinorityThing.com. Love that. Now, full disclosure, first of all, I was a supporter of candidate Kucinich during this past election. We share a lot of the same views on things like fighting obesity and working for peace. So, Congressman, let me start with you and ask you, in being so peaceful and inclusive of Republicans and former rivals like Hillary Clinton who voted for the war, does Barack Obama risk alienating the peace supporters who got him there in the first place?
Well, this really is about transformative politics. It's not just about one person, it's about all of us. And those signs that we saw in the campaign trail about change, it wasn't just about Barack Obama and changing our politics. It's about whether our culture and our society as a whole is capable of transformative change, the kind of change that will lessen violence in the society by addressing domestic violence, spousal abuse, child abuse, the kind of violence that we have in schools. How can we address that? How can we become a more peaceful society? And when you take change and you go innermost, or what's innermost becomes outermost, and we become more peaceful people. So if we have leaders who can be peaceful, certainly they help draw forth that potential from the entire population.
Well, John Ridley, I think he has been very, very peaceful, as I've said. Look at how he handled the whole Joe Lieberman situation. I mean, there is a so-called independent Democrat who ended up campaigning for McCain, and President-elect Obama sent out the word through his spokesperson, we will not hold a grudge against Lieberman. That is peaceful.
Yeah, it is peaceful, and I think it is broad-minded. I mean, the reality is a lot of these folks from Washington are not going to go away, and they're not going to leave Barack Obama alone. The idea is to bring people into this camp and allow not just for a broad variety of opinion, but also for dissent. I think a lot of people have looked at the last 8 years and said one of the problems with the administration is there was not a lot of dissent. There was not a lot of argumentation going on. It's not always a bad thing, and sometimes that can be what leads to change, is a difference of opinions.
Yeah, but let me ask you this question, Congressman Kucinich. Where does change, or I would say peacemaking and people-pleasing begin? If you are too accommodating to your enemies, do you end up adopting their positions? Because a lot of peace-oriented people and anti-war activists are worried that in really bringing all these people into his administration, Barack Obama may end up backtracking on a firm timetable for withdrawal from Iraq.
Well, first of all, peace is practical. If you want to see the impracticality of war, you just look at what happened with Iraq. Peace is not simply the absence of war, however. It's an active presence of a capacity for looking at another person, having compassion, of being able to settle differences without violence, of seeing the other person as an aspect of oneself. So if Barack Obama is taking a direction that invokes peace and draws it forth from others, I think that's an important direction for America. This goes way beyond politics. This must transcend politics, and if we are able to transcend politics, then we can come to create a new condition, and that's really what politics ought to be about, the art of not just the possible, but the art of drawing in new possibilities.
And, you know, John, I'm really profoundly impressed with this new style, which is not so much bipartisan as almost nonpartisan. And then he gets together with McCain, and they talk about football, but when the cameras go away, reportedly, they talked about global warming and closing Guantanamo and ending torture, all issues that they have agreement on.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is that people in Washington actually do agree on some things. We see disagreement constantly, but there are, and by the way, Barack Obama talked about this in his acceptance speech. What are those areas of common ground, and how do we build on those? And by the way, I think the American people are truly hungry to see their elected officials accomplish things. So what are those things that they can accomplish in the near term and start working on these larger problems? Look, just getting the troops out of Iraq is not going to happen in a day.
I think this is evolutionary, what's happening in politics, and I think everybody wants it so badly. Briefly, Congressman Kucinich, speaking of cabinet appointments, what about the Department of Peace? You have that in Congress. You are one of the co-sponsors. Tell us where it stands and why a lot of people consider it a flaky idea. I don't. I think it's a great idea.
Well, it's a national movement that focuses first on domestic policy. When you look at the cost of violence in our society, and everyone who's viewing this knows a story about domestic violence, spousal abuse, child abuse, we need an organized approach to deal with that in our society. The Department of Peace talks about setting up the kind of help that families need, particularly in these hard economic times, more pressure on families, more
And what about the
chaos
international
in the
front? What about
internationally? It would use the science of human relations. That's what FDR called seeking peace, the science of human relations, to try to find that common ground so that war does not become inevitable. You know, when you believe war becomes inevitable, war is a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if we have a president who's determined to move in a new direction and pursue peace, that can only be a positive development, not just for our country, but for the world.
Thank you, Congressman, so much for your insight. John, please stay right there. More on all these issues when we come back in just 30 seconds.